Here with David Mackenzie to talk about Fuse, a layered thriller, intense thriller. I want to talk to you about just have some questions for you here. One thing I really liked about Fuse is how it constantly kind of shifts underneath the audience, constantly shifts underneath the audience. How did you approach controlling tension when the film is kind of balancing a thriller, a heist movie, and almost a procedure at the same time?
The whole thing was kind of built on tension really in the first place, and the original idea that I had was to sort of mash up the heist movie and the unexploded bomb movie, which in a way the unexploded bomb movie has got its own tension, but also is kind of caught up in that procedural thing. And there is a sort of the beginning you're just thinking, I'm hoping you're just thinking, oh, this is just procedural. This is like they found the thing, and the cops are calling the military, and the military are doing it, and then slowly it starts to kind of unpick. Tension's a funny thing. You create tension within the scenes themselves. You create tension. Um, with the way you cut the narrative together, with the way that and I'm always trying to create tension in the edit with just slightly making the edit slightly twitchy, slightly sort of just not quite right. So you're kind of always a little bit sort of put off guard. And then obviously you do things with the soundtrack. And the case of a story like this, where there are three different strands kind of occupying the same space, it's, there's a there's a desire to kind of like keep going boom, 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 boom. But actually, the best way of creating tension is to hold one strand for as long as you can before you have to break it and start another strand. So there's a sort of juggling act of trying to keep all those elements together. It obviously starts from the tension within the scene itself, but there's a lot of construction that goes on by the time you get to a finished film in terms of tension. But it is, for me, tension is one of the most exciting kind of elements of cinema. It's a kind of one of the purest things of cinema, is feeling that anxiety and feeling that it's a very tangible thing. People just speaking words and moving about the screen is not how you get that. You get that through other kind of more pure cinematic forms in a way.
Yeah, I'm a big thriller fan, suspense fan. So I think a lot of the suspense comes from like how clearly you establish space and movement. So how much time did you spend thinking about geography before actually shooting sequences like this?
I mean, I think about geography all the time, and I'm always trying to create, if I possibly can, sets that I have 360-degree control of, and that I have as much depth as I possibly can, just because that's a world you get to play with, and all that. Obviously, in a big city like London, there are limits on that. For example, when we closed, one of the big streets down, we could only shoot for 3 minutes every 15 minutes, so it was like, but so we had to be very, very, very kind of organized on that. There's a lot of kind of spatial planning. Sometimes, though, if I'm for example, in the construction site where we had the 360 and we had that for quite a long time, um, that becomes a kind of like a sandpit, a playpen, a way that you explore the space because you have that space and you control that space. And there's something kind of fun about just letting that kind of be. And you obviously, I mean, setting the lines of sight between where the guys are in the cabin, and where the bomb is, and where the you know where all those things you have to be it was very much a thought, about how you can protect yourself from the potential explosion, but also get line of sight. So there was quite a lot of planning that went involved in that, uh, and then yeah, I mean, I think I'm very, as a director, very spatially aware, and just sort of walk into a space and can see that there, and kind of try. I don't really need to shot list and storyboard a lot of it. It's sort of it's kind of obvious where those connect. The wides and where the connection things are. But I'm very conscious of space, so thank you for asking that question.
Oh, you're welcome. So one thing I found interesting is that the film never really gives the audience a clean moral center. So was it important for you that viewers question who they should trust?
Yeah, I mean, I always, I mean, I have made a kind of career out of, of films with sort of slightly outside of characters. Some of them not necessarily on the right side of the law, and you know, but of a morality which may or may not be good or bad. You know what I mean? I'm sort of used to occupying that kind of gray area where you have characters and they can be kind of quite heroic characters, but you don't really you don't know what their absolute moral center is, and I like that. I enjoy watching films like that, and I enjoy making films like that. But in the case of this film, there are kind of these three story strands and three main story strands, and you are it's deliberately asking the question who are the good guys, and who am I rooting for? And I think it's an interesting challenge for audiences because I think audiences are used to the idea of having that completely clarified, like the good guy wears the white hat, the bad guy wears a black hat. Back in the old codes of westerns, and those things have sort of evolved. I mean, they're much more sophisticated now, but you kind of you know who you're supposed to be rooting for, and the story and the writing and everything has told you that right from the first 10 minutes of the film probably. And I just like playing around with that myself.
I enjoyed that part of this movie. So there's something very grounded and almost kind of old school about the tension infused. So were there any thrillers or even filmmakers that influenced the tone and the rhythm of this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a quite a big fan of the French filmmaker Jean-Pierre Melville, and a lot there's a sort of held back tension in a lot of Melville's films. Melville himself was an active member of the French Resistance. He was a hard nut. You know what I mean? And he made a lot of pretty interesting films. He produced them himself, so the films are very they're taciturn. There's not a lot of dialogue, and again, with sort of slightly with morally ambiguous characters, and I really like that thing. And I spoke a lot to Theo and Aaron about those kind of characters and those kind of films. So there was definitely a thread of that there. I mean, the Brits themselves are pretty good at making heist films. We've done, and the Americans are obviously genius at it too as well. I mean, it's a great thing about when you're playing these games is you're tapping into an awful lot of the history of cinema with those kind of genres, and so that you know both consciously and unconsciously.
So I mean I think the film kind of feels chaotic at times, but never visually confusing. So how do you direct sequences with this much pressure and movement without losing the audience?
I don't know. I mean, I mean, every time you shoot a scene, you're shooting a scene. You know what I mean? You're trying to. I mean, certainly for me, I'm trying to. My target is to try and extract the juice from that scene as much as possible, to make sense of that scene as much as possible, to make sure the actors, fully embrace what they're doing and are behind everything they're representing. And so that once that scene is in place, then that's the sort of epicenter, and then there's an awful lot of careful editing, and I work with my editor friend Matt Mayer on this and the last film, and they both have sort of similarities in the editing, although they're very different in terms of energy, um, and so yeah, it's sort of it's about trying to create that coherence from these individual elements.
So yeah, I'm curious because you're talking about thrillers. So do you think a thriller director's job is kind of to guide the audience? Is it more to constantly misdirect them?
Well, I think it has to be both, doesn't it? I mean, you're directing them, and sometimes misdirecting is part of directing them. For example, in Fuse, there's a few instances where if you look closely, you can see that something's happening, but if you're not looking closely, you're not seeing what something's happening. There are breadcrumbs to the results that the film kind of goes to, but part of our job is to work out when we're overstating and when we're understating, and just, the sliding scale of where to put that information and where to put that direct slash misdirect. So yeah, I mean, misdirection, I would say, is an important part of direction.
Last thing I want to ask you is, what do you think makes suspense timeless? Like, why do audiences still love sitting together and feeling tense in the theater?
I think it's primal. I think that it's one of the purest elements of cinema. Cinema in itself is basically kind of sound and images. I mean, it's a whole bunch of abstraction, but that stuff coming together and turning the knobs. Like Hitchcock did, like many, like all the people, all the early forms of cinema, going like, will they, won't they? Is they going to fall? Are they, like there's Jeopardy. All those sort of things are totally primal and turn that abstraction of cinema into something that's deeply emotional and that's the point really. It's like it's creating emotion and often through fear, that's it's another reason why horror films are so successful. Not that that's horror and thrillers are two different games, but they both occupy in that space of you're sort of on the edge of your seat and you're unable to you're like, what's going to happen next? I don't know whether I want this to happen. And it's very pure, that, you know what I mean? It's like if you're having it, in terms of all of the experiences of cinema, it's probably one of the most sort of intense and pure.
I agree. I appreciate your time, David. Thank you very much, and good luck with everything else. Enjoy the
Thank
rest
you.
of your day.
Nice to talk to you. Cheers.
Thank you, sir. Cheers.